All right. What we've been doing in class so far is manipulating web pages via JavaScript. And we've been changing a couple of things. We've been changing CSS. We've been changing HTML. We haven't used this term yet, I don't think, but actually we're doing this by manipulating the DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. What that means is everything on a web page is represented by an object. What is an object? An object is a piece of code, a piece of software that models some real world entity. So if we look at a web page, let's pick any old web page. All right, there is an image object here. There's a link object here, another link, and so on. This is a series of links with an animation. All these things are represented by objects. And the idea of this is by manipulating the code, by manipulating these software objects, we're actually manipulating the actual thing on the page. So we saw in this example that we had last time, that if we do something like this, we can change background and foreground color of something on a page. So if we type in background color of blue, foreground color of white, and we click change color, what we do is we have found this paragraph, we found the object that represents this paragraph, and we have changed the properties of it. Objects, if you remember from possibly other classes, have properties and methods. And we are changing properties. Properties are characteristics. All right, so we're changing the style property of this object that we found. And we're changing the background color and we're changing the foreground color. And we've been doing that pretty much since our first example in here. All right, and we found that we can change either the CSS properties or the HTML properties. All right, we've seen examples of both of these. What we're going to look at today is we're going to review this example to cover the stuff that we covered last time, and we're going to look at actually not changing properties, but adding and deleting objects to the page. Because if you notice, every time I click change color, I get a new list item that wasn't there. So there was an object created and put associated with that list item. That's where we got up to last time. We didn't cover that. We covered the rest of this. So let's take a quick tour of this page and we'll look at the code that, accomplishes this. First of all, we have validation. If we go and change the color, you have to put something in the foreground color and the background color. That's one thing that we have. Validation is that they can't be the same. All right, obviously, because if we have the foreground color and the background color the same color, we will not be able to read the paragraph because the font will merge with the background color. So they can't match. So we have validation in here. If we click change color, we go and we change that paragraph. So let's look at the code that accomplishes that and let's revisit some of the things that we covered last time. First thing you'll notice about this, well, maybe it's not the first thing you notice, it's the first thing I'm going to point out though. First thing about this is there is no on events on any of these HTML elements. In the first examples that we went over, on our buttons, for example, there was an on click event that said when you click the button, this happens. Well, there is none in this example. So how does it work then? How do we invoke our JavaScript code if there's not an on-click event? We do that by actually using JavaScript to add the on-click event. And we do that because keeping everything in JavaScript that relates to JavaScript is a good idea. For the same reason that keeping everything that relates to the style of the page in a CSS file is a good idea, and keeping everything about the content of the page in an HTML document is a good idea. So in this case, what we have is we have a line that's outside of the function. All right. What that means is functions only get executed when they're called. We define these functions in our JavaScript, but that doesn't mean that they immediately run. They only run when they get called. And they can get called when the button is clicked or when the page finishes loading or whatever. In this case, this is outside of any function, which means that as the browser is loading this page, it executes a statement immediately. And what does the statement say? It says, I'm going to add an event to the window. Window is a document object model object. All right, there's a window object associated with our web page. And we're adding a function to that object. Right? We're adding an event to that object. We're adding an event listener. An event listener is a function that waits until a certain event occurs, and then it executes. In this case, they're waiting until the page is loaded, and when the page finishes loading, we're going to execute the page loaded function. Put a few blank lines here to see a little bit. We do this because if we try to execute JavaScript before the page is completely loaded, maybe the browser is up to this point in the page loading it, and we try to execute some JavaScript, objects on the page might not be defined yet. All right, so we can't execute the JavaScript until the page completely loads. We want to make sure everything is loaded, all the necessary objects are created. And the way we do that is we hold off on this function to wait until the window finishes loading. So that's what this line does. If I were to put a comment in here, it would be when page finishes loading, execute function page loaded. All right. Now that's a function I created. It's right over here. It's a good idea, by the way, for all my examples, if you were to go in and write comments for the lines of code, you put comments in JavaScript simply by doing the 2 slashes like I did here. It's a good idea to do this because that shows that you understand it. If you have any questions about your code, your comments, feel free to send me the comments and the altered version of the code. And I can take a look at them and I can help you make sure that you understand the code that you think that you understand. All right, so when the page finishes loading, we're going to do this. What does this do? Well, first of all, it calls console log here. What does that mean? That means that it's going to write to our JavaScript console a message here. So if we were to look at more tools, developers tools, console, we see it wrote here. Why do we do that? We do that for debugging reasons. I ran through some examples last time when functions weren't being called properly. And I wanted to tell if a function actually executed or not. That's important when you're debugging. A lot of times you might stare at some code and wonder why it doesn't work, when the real problem is, for whatever reason, that function never gets called. So before you start staring at a function and debug it, it's a good idea to make sure that that function actually got called. And one way of making sure of that is logging something to the console saying that, hey, you're in this function. We can use this for other reasons too, and I'm sure there'll be examples throughout the semester where I do this. You know, we can look at values of variables, we can do any number of things. All right, what we're going to do here is we're going to attach functions to the on-click event of the two buttons. There's two buttons, a change color and a clear history. This one obviously changes the color. This one clears the history that's formed in that unordered list. So the first thing that we're doing is we're finding the change button, change color button. And we do that by, again, using the DOM. The document object model says that our window contains a document. On that document, we want to find the thing on the page, we want to find the object on the page that has an ID of BTN change. And sure enough, that is the change button. It's an ID of button change. What are we going to do to that button? We're going to add an event listener, just like we did up here. What does that mean? It means that when this button is clicked, this is the function that we're calling. Likewise, when this button is clicked, this is the function that we're calling. All right, cool. So when we click that button, it calls button change. I'm sorry, it should call button change. When we click it, calls change color. The first thing it does is validate the form. The validation of the form looks at different values and makes sure that a value was entered. All right. In this case, we assume that everything is okay. We wipe out any error text that's there. The error text appears after the item. And we set the inner HTML, which is a property of that span, to an empty string. We look to see if there's nothing entered in the background color text box, text BG. We look if there's nothing entered into the foreground one, and we check to see if they are equal. If any of these conditions are true, if there's nothing entered, or if they match, we're going to change that be valid flag to false. And that means that we didn't enter valid data, therefore don't continue the processing. And then we're going to add to the inner HTML of our error message some sort of error message. In either case, we return a true or a false. If we return true, this continues, and we do these lines of code. If it returns false, we don't do anything. I think we covered up to here last time. I'm going through this a little bit quickly because we did cover this last time, so this is just sort of a review. We get the value of the background color, the value of the foreground color. We change the paragraph style to set the background color to BG and the foreground color to FG. The effect of that is when we're done, we have changed style of this paragraph to match what we entered in here. Now, any questions at this point? Now, one thing that we can do to make this a little bit better is we can trim the value. Because the way this code is written now, if I enter in some spaces, it's going to think something was entered. And it's going to process. I'm literally looking for no characters here as it's written. So I could say, if the value of that text box, trim it. And if that equals to an empty string. So trimming gets rid of any leading and trailing strings. So if we put spaces in here, now it knows that we must enter something. So whatever you're testing to see if there's a value entered, instead of saying the value equals an empty string, say value trim equals empty string. All right, now the fun part. We're going to create some HTML. This line creates an LI object. All right. And assigns that object to the variable create LI. So when we're done with this statement right here, we have floating in space somewhere, floating in memory, an LI object. If we were to comment this stuff out, that's another way to do comments, /**, */*. If we were to comment that out, it's not going to add it to the page. Right? So it made the change, but it didn't add it to our history. Why not? Well, because we didn't do anything with this LI. We just created it. So in memory, there's an LI object. We just haven't done anything with it. That's what the next lines do. All right. I'm going to create text. And I do that by creating a text node. All right. A text node is simply a piece of text that is the value of an HTML tag. Not the value, but between the start and end HTML tag. So what we're doing is we've created our LI. Our text node is everything between the start and end LI. We had a link. There'd be a text node here too. Let's say the text that you had to click on to invoke that link. So the text node is that block of text between the starting and ending tag. And we create one of those. That text node at this point is still floating in space. It's not even associated with this LI. If I comment this line out, we got our LI, but we didn't put the text node associated with it. So there's no text for the LI. We add a text node to an object by using the append child. All right. We'll talk more about this, this whole children business in a minute here. All right. When we say child, we are talking about something that is nested inside an object. So we have our LI object. A child of that is the text that appears in it. So we create that LI and we add to that LI our text node. So at this point, we have an LI floating in space. By floating in space, I mean it's not on any web page yet. It's just in memory. And it contains the text that we want it to have. Because we added that text node to our object, which we created called LI. We then find the thing on the page that has an ID of history. And that is this ID here. It's our UL that has no LIs in it. And we append that object that we created, we add it to that UL. We add, strictly speaking, we add a child. That LI is now a child of the UL. When I say child, I mean it's nested as part of it. So if we have something like this, this LI is a child of UL. This text is a child of this LI. What that means is this LI is nested as part of this UL, and this text is nested as part of this LI. This whole thing comes from trees and nodes and all that kind of stuff. If you think about it, an HTML document is really like a big upside down tree. At the top of the tree, we have our document, our HTML document. Underneath that, we have a node for the head. We have a node for the body. Underneath the body, we can have all kinds of things. One of the things that we have is ULs. And each UL can have underneath it a bunch of LIs. This is the document object model. It's showing the objects that are on the page and how those objects are related to each other. So HTML contains the head and body. The body contains the LI. The UL or the LIs are contained as part of the UL. So now when we're done, that gets added to the history list. So that's why when we're all done here, when we type something in here, let's refresh to start clean. If I type something in here, it not only changes that, but it writes to that UL the change that we just made. Text node is created by concatenating this BG value that we grab from the text box for background, the FG value that we grab for the text box for FG. And that got added to the LI. The LI gets added to the UL. Now we can have more fun than this. Yes, this is fun. Always be sure that you're having fun when you're programming, because programming is meant to be fun, I think. It can be frustrating, but it's frustrating in my mind the way that video games are frustrating. They're still fun, and in fact, if they're too easy, it's not any fun. So the fact that it's a little bit challenging actually adds to the fun, believe it or not. I want you to think about this for a minute. I'm going to pose a question, and then I want you to think about it for a minute. What if I wanted this, the LI that I create, to match the color scheme that I just entered? So in this case, I want this LI to have a background of black and a foreground of white. How will I do that? Can I do that? And of course, the answer to that is probably, right? If it deals with changing something on a page or creating something on a page, creating some object on a page, the answer is probably yes, I can do that. So, okay, think about it. How would I do that? Give you a minute to think about that. See if you can form an answer in your head. Okay. Here's how we can do it. What is the name of our LI object that we just created? It's stored in a variable called createLi. So createLi is my object. How do we change the style of an object? Well, in the past, we've used document get element by ID and put the ID in here. That gives us the object. We don't need to do that here because we already have a variable that points to that object. So I can say, createLi, what about it? I want to change the style. What about the style? I want to change the background color. And what do I want to change it to? I want to change it to the contents of the variable BG. And what do I want to change the text color to? I want to change it to the value that's in FG, the values that we grab from that text box. All right, let's see if that works. And sure enough, it does. I didn't have that prepared before time, so I was crossing my fingers that I didn't make some mistake or forgot something or whatever. It's all about objects and changing the properties of those objects. Calling methods on those objects. A pen child is a method that exists for any HTML element. We can add a child because any tag can have other tags nested within it. All right. Any questions about this? Go through and comment these lines of codes and make sure that you understand. Get rid of lines and see what happens. What happens when I get rid of this line? I showed that in class. All right. We create our LI, but we didn't add our text to it. So you know we created this text node. We didn't say what to do with that text node. Therefore, we don't do anything to it. We have to explicitly add that to the LI object that we created. All right. Our last piece of this so far, and then we're going to spend 20 minutes or so playing with this, is the clear history button. Remember, we associated with the clear history button the method button clear. Here's code that you can do to remove all the children from any object. So getting back to this, this will get rid of any children that are associated with our selected object. First of all, we point to the object that we want to get rid of the children for. In this case, we want to get rid of everything in history list. Or we want to get rid of everything in that has ID of history. And we're going to call that object history list. We're then going to loop through while history list first child. Now, this might be confusing. I'm going to try to explain it. If my explanation doesn't make sense, just understand that this is the way you get rid of all the children underneath a node. This function returns the first node underneath this object. So it returns the first child object or child node that's part of history. Well, if there is a child for it, it returns that node. If there is not a child, if for example, the UL is already blank, then this returns the answer false. So as long as what this loop says, and again, commenting this is good, as long as children exist for my object, get the first child and remove it. So if we do this, when we click on clear history, it's going to go and it's going to take that child node and it's going to remove it. This first child itself is an object. Believe it or not, we could do something with this object. We could put that, for example, in another LI. I'm going to put it in an OL. I'm going to call that old history. So we grab that object, grab the first child, we remove it from the history list. I'm then going to find old history. I'm attempting to show you it's all about these objects. And I'm going to add pen child, first child in the unordered list. And didn't work. I save it. Yes, I did. Okay, we have two. Oh, this needs to be an end OL. Tell you what, I found that out just because I've done this for a million years and my eyes are fine-tuned to pick things up. The better thing to do would be to look at the console, see what error it gives. It didn't give any error, which is curious. Oh, I haven't pressed the delete yet. That's why it didn't show up. It doesn't show up. It doesn't show up when you add it. It shows up when you clear. So if I clear history, still doesn't work. Let's look at our console. Doesn't give me any errors. Let's give it a color other than white. Because unfortunately it makes the bullet that color too. So if I clear this, there, this is item 1, this white on, but I don't see it. Failed to execute, remove child. On node, parameter 1 is not of type node. Not sure why we're getting that. That might just indicate that we are done clearing that. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure why I'm getting that error, because I grabbed the old history list, I add that first child, and I remove it from the other one. That ought to work. Yeah, I'm not sure. Now, what does this have to do with your assignment? Right? You might ask yourself. Well, you have to create some HTML on your page. Remember, your assignment is to look like this. You're going to have a drop down for the type of coin and a drop down for the number of coins. And then a button. When you click the button, it is going to put the value of it. So if I pick 2 dimes, it's going to show 20 cents. And then it's going to draw 2 dimes. All right, so let's look at how this example, now this assignment is different from your example. All right. It's different because this, you could possibly use the inner HTML. To set the value once you do the calculation. Or you could create a text node and add it to a paragraph or something that contained the text. These are images that you need to create. Just like I created LIs, you're going to create images. We'll take a look at how you might be able to do that in a second here. The other thing is, these are drop downs and not text box. In my example, I have the color and the background color in text boxes. Yours is going to be in drop downs. So you're going to have to see how you pull the value from a drop down. And don't worry, it's not that hard. I think they're drop downs according to the assignment. They might be radio buttons. In which case, in some of the resources I gave, I'm sure it will show you how to pull the value of a drop down or a radio button. If not, take a shot at trying to figure it out on your own. It isn't a cop-out when I say that some things that an assignment might require, I haven't explicitly gone over to class, in class, because the idea is that you should be able to take a shot and do some research and figure it out yourself. Now, if you can't, you always have me as a resource. If you can't figure out how to get the value from a drop down, that's fine. Just let me know, hey, I've tried this, but at least try it on your own. And don't spend hours on it either, Spend a reasonable amount of time trying to figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, then email me with the question and we can go from there. And by all means, send the code when you email me through Canvas. All right. I do get students a lot of times that send me and describe the problem they're having without sending me the code. And I don't know if they think I'm clairvoyant or what, but I have no chance of being able to figure out what the problem is without looking at the code. Right? I view this like a video game. I love the Legos video games, like Lego Star Wars and Lego Models. And if you're not familiar with those games, there are certain puzzles for you to figure out. And after you've played the game for a while, the puzzles sort of repeat themselves, and you sort of have an idea how they work. But every once in a while, you come into a puzzle that's a little tricky, and you can't figure it out. Well, I have no problem at all going online and reading through a walkthrough that says how to solve that puzzle. Well, I usually take a shot at it. So if I take a shot at it and I get to the point where I'm getting frustrated, where like I want to throw the controller out the window, before you get to that point, look up the cheat code or look up the frequently asked questions that walk through how to figure out that puzzle. All right. That's what I tell myself. Same thing here. Take a shot at figuring out how to do these things. And if you can't figure them out, then contact me. But tell me what you've tried. All right. If you're asking for help, send me the code and tell me what you have tried and go from there. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to look up how I can create an image in JavaScript. Now, keep in mind, there's a couple different ways you can do almost everything in coding. So if you find a resource that might be a little different than what I used in class. JavaScript, create image, create element. All right. See if Bobby's going to help us out here. All right, tells you what you need to do. Document create element to create the image tag. We've already seen how to do that to create an LI tag. How do you think you're going to do an image tag? Well, instead of LI, you're going to use image. Use set attribute method to set the source attribute. We haven't covered the set attribute method, but I'm trusting that you can figure it out. Set attribute, src, and put the name of the image here. That's an awful long image, but you would just put between the quotes, you'd put the name of the image. So create the thing on the page, create the image object, set the attribute of that image object, set the other attributes of it. So you can set the size or the alt attribute or whatever, set the style of it, and then pin that to someplace on your page. All right. Are there any questions out there? We will do more JavaScript magic next week. I haven't decided exactly what we're covering, but we'll probably review this stuff and get into some more hijinks. All right, if there are no further questions, that's all I had today. We'll talk to you next week.